This video is actually designed for the residents of the Isle of Man specifically, although it can be applied to any area of the UK. Your government is set on a net zero path in the Isle of Man, and to do that it's based that work that it's doing now on a report here by Mr. Curran. This is a report, and this video deals with the, well, with what I believe to be the things that are being covered up from you, and the things that could lead to the ruining of your economy and have very high energy prices for the long term, ruining part of your environment in various ways, ruining nature and so on. So I will explain these things. It doesn't require any scientific knowledge, what I'm going to explain, and I'm going to use the figures that are presented in this report. Currently, the Isle of Man enjoys the following in terms of energy production. Pulrose closed-circuit gas, that's an efficient form of gas turbine, 130 megawatt output. The Peel diesel generator, 40 megawatts. And you've got Peel energy from waste plant, which they claim is 3 megawatts. So in total, you've got 173 megawatts of reliable energy on call at any one time to meet demand. And on top of that, you have an interconnected to the mainland of 65 megawatts. The plan is to put 150 megawatts of wind energy up and 50 megawatts of solar energy, giving a total of 200 megawatts. But it isn't that simple, of course, because, of course, at times the wind doesn't blow, even for long periods when there's a high over the Isle of Man and you enjoy nice weather. And of course, we know that the sun does not shine all the time. So at times, both of those can give zero energy. In fact, that's very frequent. I'm going to show you just how. I'm going to take, as I make this video, some figures for recent times, recent days for the UK. This graph shows you for the UK the percentage that wind supplied of our energy at different times. And we've stopped it just when I'm making the video, so I'm not able to extend it any further. But as you can see, just in these 18 days or so, we've had 30% here, down to really nothing here, very little here, okay, middling here, up and down. It's up and down like a yo-yo, and that's how wind is. So what happens, because we obviously can't run our economy on this sort of energy distribution, we have to have energy available when we need it to run our industry and to live. Well, what happens? The only thing that can top up wind is gas, preferably open circuit gas, but closed circuit will have to do because closed circuit's a little bit slower at adjusting, more difficult. But nevertheless, we can top up with gas. So this is how the gas was topped up in that same period. The bulk of the energy had to come from gas. There was simply no choice. And for illustration, just let's take the time of 11:10 GMT on the 17th of May. At that time, the percentage being supplied by wind was 1.23 gigawatts and the demand was 33.81. So at times, wind contributes very, very little. And at times we've had as much as 9 days in the UK with less than 1% of the energy being supplied by wind. Now, of course, the fact that wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time is recognised. So going back to our graph there of the wind for the first 18 days or so of May, you could say a long-term average for that was 30%, but a load factor, which is the long-term average, is measured over years. So it's what on balance over the years we expect to get on average from the wind farm. So what load factors does the report mention? Well, I'll read it here. If by 2030, under the higher ambition scenario, and the other scenario is just doing it later, so the end result's the same, the Isle of Man has established 150 megawatts of onshore wind generation and 50 megawatts of solar generation, then the total power is 200 megawatts. But with a load factor of around 35% for wind and 10% for solar, suggest a delivery across the year of around 500,000 megawatt hours, implying a new grid strengthening stabilising cost of 6.5 million a year. It should be noted this figure is very uncertain. You can say that again. Let's examine those figures. Well, taking the figures from the government's own figures, this is from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. A clash in terms if ever there was one, but this is the official government figures for load factors. Well, taking onshore wind, it's not the 35% claimed in the report. In England, it's 25.6%. Northern Ireland makes it up to 26.8%. Scotland, 28.4%, and Wales, 27.4%. The UK average is 27.6%. So I'd be prepared to settle for 27 as a reasonable figure for the Isle of Man, not the 35. So what difference does this make? Well, the answer is the 35% down to 27% of just the wind part. The solar or 10% load factor is okay, but on just the wind part, this reduces the 500,000 megawatt hours a year down to just 385,000 megawatt hours a year. A pretty fundamental difference just to begin with, but there's a lot more. The report claims that the current average energy consumption in the Isle of Man is 360,000 megawatt hours a year. But that is not an average throughout the day or the week or the month. That's an average throughout the whole year. And even in the day, there's big peak demands and there's low demands overnight. So let's just examine what typically would be just the day to night, keeping it simple, variation in the Isle of Man between what is the low demand overnight, what is the high demand during the day. Well, anyone can find out the total UK energy situation, where the energy is coming from and the total demand at any time by typing in to your browser energydashboard.co.uk. And as I'm making this video, I just did it at this second, as it were. So there we are. And all we're interested in here is not where the energy is coming from. We're interested in how big is the demand in the day and what does it drop to overnight. So you can see here, it's on this time, it's about 33, 34. We'll call it 34 gigawatts in the day. And at night time, we will call it around about 20-ish. So if we go from about 20 to 34, that's the variation we'll get. So in other words, typically, daytime demand can be 70% higher than overnight demand. But the wind couldn't care less about your needs and when you demand the power. It blows when it blows. So now just looking at the total demand here. So taking out all the parts that make it up, here we have the total demand curve. Superimposing onto that curve, let's look at an example of wind power coming in. So the red line is the wind amount coming in. And as you can see, there's an area here where there's excess wind at night over the demand. And again here, excess wind over the demand. And you will be paying for all that excess wind, even though you don't want it. And this can be quite considerable. In the case of 3 Scottish wind farms, it was almost 50% of the time. And in addition, when an accounting company looked at the claims for switching off, they found that wind farms were exaggerating their claims by 10 to 20%, meaning that most of the time they were being paid for not giving you power. And as if to add insult to injury, there are times here and here where there's just not enough wind to meet demand. And so we have to use gas that has been kept expensively in backup with the turbine spinning ready to react. It is a ridiculous system. Basically, wind power is a medieval system, and they're trying to return it to us. But just those two aspects alone aren't sufficient to explain just how bad it is. Now, just looking at the Isle of Man, again, with that average consumption of 360,000 megawatt hours a year. Well, on average, per day, that 360,000 over 365 equals 986 megawatt hours per day, which on per hour basis is, as you can see there, 41 megawatts. So the average throughout the day is 41 megawatts, but we know that varies. It can vary by a low, and the high can be as much as 70% or more. So taking that 70% we used before from the analysis, and we could get all sorts of variations on that, but let's say the 30 to 51 megawatt could be the same. And I am making it really simple here because the truth is this demand varies by the season. So it's less in summer normally than it is in winter, and for many reasons it varies. But I'm just trying to give you an idea here of just how bad now the situation can be. Because we're needing 30 to 51 megawatts on this example, what do we have from wind and solar? Well, from wind we have a capacity, a peak, of about 150 megawatts, and from the solar, 50 megawatts. So if you've got a windy day, and it's really, managing to get its proper amount out as a peak, you're going to be dwarfed by the costs of the wind. Just look at the graph here. On such a day, you'll be paying treble the amount just for the wind. And if you add solar onto this, well, it just is adding insult to injury, because none of it would be needed, but you'd still pay for it. The reason why this hasn't shown itself in the UK as a whole fully as yet is because the wind power level, the maximum level, is normally well below the demand. But they plan to treble the wind, and when they do that, you end up with this situation. But the Isle of Man have gone ahead of that. To do all the virtue signalling of your House of Keys, they've demanded the full whack straight away, and this is a result. Children could have planned this better, because people just work on averaging reports. They don't work on the real world situation that any normal engineer would apply to this. Now let's consider when the sun's not shining, so we'll take the solar out, and there's no wind. That wind drops, and the whole lot is taken up by the gas. And that gas station there has to be available. It has to be available to fully back you up 100%. All you've managed to do here is duplicate an entire very expensive, totally unrealistic system on top of what you already have. It is pure madness. Now, you wouldn't think it could get worse than I've explained so far. You've guessed it, it does get worse. Let's look at some of the strike prices. That's the price we are paying for wind and solar power. And let me tell you something straight away. They fiddle the appearance of this, because the price they quote is the 2012 price. In other words, when people are saying this is what we're paying per megawatt, it's based on the 2012 price, but the real price allows for the inflation because all these prices are index linked. And so the prices are much higher. So these are typical prices now that are being applied for and being accepted in the UK. And to give you some background to that, the price we should be paying for a megawatt in reasonable times would be £30 to £40 per megawatt. Say £35. I'd accept £40. If we had the right sort of energy policies I've been advocating now for a decade or more, that is what we'd have. But what we're looking at are these prices here. What I'm going to show you now is just a few points from this report here. The link to this report is in the description below this video. Well, just taking solar first. In the UK, renewables are subsidised by 3 different schemes. Feed-in tariffs fund mostly solar power. The latest report for 2022-23 shows the scheme cost over £1.7 billion and average total payment was £193 per megawatt hour, which is about 3 times the current cost of gas-fired power at around £65 a megawatt hour. That £65 is roughly the high price we are paying today. But the madness of green energy is locking us into much higher prices for the future. More costs are coming down the line as the National Grid has announced £54 billion of spending on the electricity network infrastructure up to 2030 and a further £58 billion in the 2030 to 2035 period, a total of £112 billion, or over £10 billion per year for more than a decade. Again, please look at the link I've given you in the description to this video if you want to know more about this. But please do not join in the madness of the rest of the UK. Isle of Man has an opportunity to plot its own path and have a much more prosperous future than the madness that's going on in the rest of the UK. Stop the groupthink. The madness in the rest of the UK has now gone as far as offering £246 per megawatt hour for floating offshore wind, 4 times the current high price of energy, 4 times, and index linking it 20 plus years into the future. This is total madness. And just let's consider the poor old gas station here and their costs. And this little report here explains it quite well. More painfully, you pay a much higher price for gas-generated electricity. Power stations must charge a price which covers their capital and operation costs. If they spend half their operational lifetime switched off to make way for wind, they must charge more per unit of electricity to break even. This often on-again routine has a secondary impact on modern combined cycle gas turbines. That's the one you've got in the Isle of Man, because these take 90 minutes of warming up to reach their peak thermal. Open circuit, by the way, I'll explain, gas stations are much faster, but they burn a lot more fuel. You're caught between the devil and the deep blue sea there. I'll return to this report. Constant interruption means our CCGTs currently waste 20 to 25% more fuel per megawatt hour than they would if they were allowed to run consistently. No surprise then that the pre-crisis Britain CCGTs general electricity was the most expensive in Europe, with prices 73.4% above the EU average according to the 2020 EU Commission report, a finding that authors attribute to stations' very low utilisation rate. So there you are, much more expensive gas because of the intermittent nature. This has to be understood, and is well understood in the engineering world. This 2022 report shows that this balancing cost, that's the cost, the extra cost of trying to cope with the variations in the wind, arose 48% in 1 year. Well, that's going to get even worse when the wind provides a bigger proportion of the energy, as I've already explained. And also, as already explained, the cost of turning off wind farms because there was too much wind. That reached a record high in 2021, but again has much further to go. So no matter how you look at this, the cost of wind to you in the Isle of Man is going to be ruinous. It is absolutely going to ruin your economy, because what all economies really depend on to get growth and quality of living is cheap energy, and you're going in the exact opposite direction. At this point in this video, I could easily carry on with so many other devastating facts about wind and solar. For example, how you're being deceived about the number of homes a wind or solar farm can supply. When they actually give you a figure like 10,000 homes, they don't mean all the power to 10,000 homes. They assume that those homes have 80% gas. I could go on and explain all sorts of things, but what I've decided to finish this video with is the impact on your environment and tourism, because I don't think it is fully understood. I will just deal with wind. I could go on to solar, but to keep the video reasonably short, I'm leaving a lot of the other topics until I come and give my talk in the Isle of Man. So here we are. Just look at what will be happening to your beautiful island when the wind farms go up. Wind farms kill birds. They also kill bats, and they do so in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. The birds they kill lay on the ground around them, and this attracts other birds, birds of prey. Just look at this eagle here. This is what happens because the wind farm is turning at its tip there at probably about 150 miles an hour. A German study showed that in Germany alone, 200,000 bats are dying annually to wind turbine-related causes. Researchers say that bats are colliding with rotor blades and losing access to traditional habitats, posing a serious conservation issue. In actual fact, the poor bats don't have to be hit by the blades. The change in pressure around them is so much that it can actually burst their lungs. This study on offshore wind farms in the North Sea, just off Holland, showed a 90% reduction in some of the diving birds. This is the effect of wind farms that you'll be introducing. So just what size are these wind farms? Just how big are the turbines? Well, this report wants to have 150 megawatts of wind power. So looking at the size of them, we'll take the small one, that's the 2 megawatt one, that's as big, as tall as the Statue of Liberty in New York. And it's almost as tall as St. Paul's Cathedral there. Or put another way, even this small one is 4.5 times higher than your Douglas Head Lighthouse. Or you could go for a bigger one like the 10 megawatt turbine, and that is, well, it's as tall as the Shard in London and much, much bigger than St. Paul's Cathedral. It dwarfs St. Paul's Cathedral, and it's as high as the Eiffel Tower almost. These things are enormous, and the concrete basis for them are fantastic works of construction. So you either have, let's say, 15 10 megawatt ones, or you have, to get 150, you'd need 75 of the 2 megawatt ones. This would completely ruin the appearance of the Isle of Man, and it would seriously affect your bird and bat population. These are some of the questions that I think somebody should be asking your Parliament. Why did you accept a very high load factor for wind? What percentage of excess wind over demand have you allowed for, along with the costs? What load balancing costs have you allowed for? What strike prices do you intend to pay for the wind and solar? Do you accept that to keep up with your sustainability policy, you still need 100% gas diesel backup? Where is your cost-benefit analysis for the entire project? What is the actual benefit to your citizens? Where is your environment ecology report? Why are you proceeding based on unscientific data, which is not even claimed to be accurate within the report? So those are just some of the questions that maybe citizens of the Isle of Man should be asking the political representatives. And by the way, when this issue was raised in your House of Keys, the response was not an answer. The response was laughter. And I believe you citizens of the Isle of Man deserve these points to be taken far more seriously than being scoffed at by ignorant people who do not understand any of the issues related to this matter. What follows is a recording from your Parliament about someone trying to ask serious questions about your energy policy. At one point they are scoffed at and not answered. This contempt of serious questions is not what I believe you citizens of the Isle of Man should be getting. I am going to play the entire recording here of that and finish the video with it. I just hope that these points I've raised in this video, and they are only just some of the points that can be raised, have opened the eyes of the citizens of the Isle of Man to what is heading their way.
To question 12, call on the Honourable Member for Arbroath Assembly, Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would like to ask the Chair of the Manchester Utility Authority what plans there are for the Pulrose Power Station. Thank you.
Call on the Chairman of the Manchester Utilities Authority to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his continued interest in the MUA. The facility at Pulrose Power Station comprises 2 separate generating stations, a diesel fuel station and a combined cycle gas fuel station. Both stations currently play a key role in maintaining secure and reliable electricity supplies for our island. These operating systems will remain in place until such time as they are replaced with carbon-neutral equivalents. As part of wider plans to decarbonise the electricity system, Manchester Utilities are working to ensure island supply secure beyond 2030, with the optimum mix of existing and new infrastructure across its electricity generation portfolio. Thank you.
Mr Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you, Chair. How does the power station fit in with the government's net zero plans? And is there any indicative cost of how much it would cost to rebuild a similar power station today? If the worst happens, or you want to build a similar one? Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As already stated, operating systems will remain in place until such time they are replaced with carbon neutral equivalents in line with the Climate Change Act. An emissions compliant replacement gas turbine station is not a preferred option for the future and is likely to be more expensive than carbon neutral alternatives. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder whether the chairman would agree that the Pulrose Power Station could remain in service as it stands for many decades if only the government would relax its ruinous and futile race to net zero. Thank you, sir.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. An interesting alternative perspective, as always. Thank you.
Supplementary question, Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just building on that observation from the honourable gentleman, in 2017, the then chair of the MUA, Dr. Allison, suggested that the life expectancy could go beyond 2050. Is that still the case? And the UK at the moment are actually looking at retaining such power stations for the long term, but also building new gas power stations. Given the recent announcements, has that actually altered the MUA thinking? Have the MUA actually considered what's being suggested across? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The main function of the gas power station in the UK is to provide a backup to ensure reliable electricity supplies. The Isle of Man has access to these backup provisions via its existing interconnector, and therefore is not completely dependent on Pulrose. Max Utilities is, however, considering maintaining the gas turbines beyond 2030 emergency on-island backup purposes, and of course that's good news. Thank you.
Question, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Does the chair agree with me that government is looking again at its energy strategy at the moment? And given that the infrastructure strategy clearly said what Mr. Peters said it said, which is that the CCGT plant can carry on till 2050 if necessary, does the chair agree with me that this is beyond the Manx Utilities Authority and the whole of Tynwald and government needs to look at energy and its policy for providing it in the future?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, if I'm in canvass for my opinion, I would agree with him. Manx Utilities continuously, daily, looks at how it derives its energy and where it's going to be best to put our plants in the future. One thing is for certain, we are absolutely maintaining a resilient supply, planning for the future. There's nothing more important than that. And at the end of the day, we are a utility for the community, and we take our role very seriously. Thank you.
Mr. Morehouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the initial answer, the chair made reference to the environmental impact and related issues, but with regard to the power station, isn't the embedded carbon a key factor? Is that something that's actually being considered? Because the power station has been upgraded several times since it was built, and it's become increasingly environmentally friendly. In terms of the alternatives, they are to create a major environmental impact. So in terms of looking at decommissioning the embedded carbon and what we've got at Pulrose, is that being fully assessed with regard to creating something completely new in a greenfield environment? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman to reply.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pulrose Power Station has regular maintenance, including major overhauls of gas turbines. It would be wrong to suggest the infrastructure is more environmentally friendly than renewables and other low-carbon technologies. Thank you.
Turn to question 30.
Well, this video started off with the intention of it being 5 or 10 minutes. It's ended up at 30. The video is designed for what's going on at the Isle of Man that I'll be visiting in June, and hopefully having some public engagements in June to try to stop the madness of the path they're on with net zero. But the Isle of Man is just a microcosm of the UK, and all the messages I've got in this video also apply to the UK. I could have carried on with the video for hours, pointing out that sometimes we paid 100 times the price of power to buy it in, and sometimes we paid 50 times the price to get rid of it, and so on, and all the madness that comes with this net zero thing, based on no science, based on models that are just opinions. But if you watch the two videos I've linked below, plus the film I've linked to, those three things really give you a good background to it all. The one on CO2 goes into the science of CO2. So in this mad world where we're trying to stop more plant food, I'll bring this video to a close. And I thank you for watching. And I, as always, will answer any questions you wish to raise in the discussion area below. Thank you.